Everyone in the office called him Ross the robot. He never raised his voice, but his silence could silence a room. Meetings with him felt like cross-examinations. Compliments were unheard of, and smiles. Those were unicorns, rumored, never seen. Emma Calderon had heard the warnings on her first day. Don't be late. Don't be chatty. Don't bring him decaf by accident. And whatever you do, don't expect him to care. She tried not to take it personally. Damon Ross treated everyone with the same detached precision. Still, some days, it cut deeper than she let on. Like the morning her mother's fever spiked and the bus broke down. She sprinted into the office 3 minutes late, heart racing, breath short. He looked up from his desk as she passed. You're late, he said. Flat. Final. I know. I'm really sorry, my bus. Excuses are optional. Results are not. She bit the inside of her cheek and sat down, blinking back tears she refused to shed at work. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, but her heart wasn't in it. It hadn't been in weeks. She needed this job. The insurance. The paycheck. The fragile lifeline it gave her mother. And yet, every day here felt like swallowing glass. What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that Damon Ross had watched her fumble that morning with a clenched jaw and a barely audible sigh. He'd typed her name into a form the moment she passed his door. And with a few quiet keystrokes, he'd started a chain of actions that would change her life forever. But she wouldn't find that out. Not until the day she thought she had nothing left. And not until she realized the mean boss everyone warned her about might just be the one person quietly holding her world together. Before Brenton and Company, Emma Calderon lived in a world of waiting rooms and, maybe next time, emails. Graduating with a degree in marketing just as her mother was diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disease was not part of the plan. But life rarely cared for plans. Emma had spent most of her 20s juggling unpaid internships, part-time gigs, and side jobs, anything that could help pay for the medication insurance wouldn't cover. Her mother, Teresa, had once been a strong, radiant woman who ran a local bakery and gave the warmest hugs. Now, confined to a hospital bed more often than not, her skin pale, her hands trembling, she spoke in whispered encouragements. Keep going, mija. You're stronger than this storm. Emma clung to those words, even as her world thinned to doctor's notes and overdue bills. So when Brenton and Company called, offering her a junior copywriter position with full benefits, Emma cried in the middle of a grocery aisle. It wasn't just a job. It was hope, sealed in a corporate envelope. But the hope came wrapped in icy formality named Damon Ross. The first time she met him, he didn't shake her hand. He only looked her up and down, then said, if you can't write clean copy under pressure, don't bother unpacking your desk. She laughed nervously. He didn't. Over time, Emma learned how to survive under Damon's rule, speak only when spoken to, anticipate his edits, never miss a deadline, and absolutely never show weakness. But weakness was all she had left most days. She woke at 5:30 every morning to help her mother bathe and dress before catching the 6:15 bus across town. She skipped lunches to save for prescriptions. Her phone was filled with reminders, appointments, dosages, bills, job tasks, all stacked like dominoes. If one thing slipped, the whole structure wobbled. At work, she smiled when spoken to and cried in restroom stalls. She answered emails with cheerful sign-offs even when her heart was breaking. And through it all, Damon Ross loomed like a shadow, watchful, impassive, unreachable. But Emma didn't hate him. Strangely, she couldn't. There was something in his eyes when he looked at her work. Not warmth, but precision. Not praise, but something deliberate. He saw everything. He remembered details. He noticed when she skipped lunch, though he never said a word. Once, she caught him hovering outside the break room when she was crying on the phone with the hospital. He turned and walked away before she saw him. But his reflection in the glass door lingered longer than necessary. Rumors swirled among the team. That he'd lost someone years ago. That he used to be warm until someone, broke him. But no one dared ask. Emma wondered, sometimes, in her most exhausted moments, if the sharpness was a mask. If he was like her, a tired soul stretched too thin, pretending not to feel just to survive the day. Still, survival left little room for speculation. Her focus had to stay on her mother, on her work, on not slipping up. She was already on thin ice with deadlines. The big client pitch was coming up, and Damon had handed it to her, the most junior staffer. No explanation. Just a cold, make it good. Emma didn't know whether it was a test or a setup. But she threw herself into it like it was her last chance. Maybe it was. And then, just days before the presentation, her mother collapsed. The ambulance came at 4 a.m. Emma spent the next 30 hours in a folding chair beside a hospital bed, heart clenched, praying the beeping machines would keep going. When the nurse handed her the new prescription list, her legs almost gave out. The medication cost more than her paycheck. And the insurance. It didn't cover it. Tears came then, hot and helpless. She pulled out her phone to call in, to explain, but the words tangled in her throat. She left a voicemail. Rambling, shaky, incomplete. Then she turned off her phone and curled into the stiff hospital couch, too numb to care about what waited back at the office. When she returned 3 days later, exhausted and sure she'd find a termination letter on her desk, what she found instead was nothing. Just her chair, her inbox, and an envelope with her name on it. A single post-it, signed, D. Emma stared at the envelope on her desk like it was a trap. She glanced around. No one else seemed to notice. The office buzzed as usual, keyboards tapping, phones ringing, someone laughing too loudly near the water cooler. Life had gone on without her. She sat slowly, heart pounding, and peeled the envelope open. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a post-it note. Take care of what matters. The presentation's been handled. D. Below the note, a printed confirmation, a payment made to the regional pharmacy in her name. It matched the exact cost of her mother's medication, down to the last cent. Emma's breath caught in her throat. She checked the timestamp. It had been processed the same morning she left that shaky voicemail. Her mind reeled. Why would he do that? Why her? She grabbed her phone and hurried toward the stairwell, the only place quiet enough to think. Leaning against the cold wall, she reread the note a dozen times. Damon Ross. Her boss. The man who never smiled. Who never asked how she was. Who once rejected an ad concept with the words, "You can do better. Try thinking next time." He had paid for her mother's medication. Not with pomp. Not with praise. Not even with a follow-up. Just, quietly. She didn't know what stunned her more, the act itself, or how precisely he'd known what she needed, even when she hadn't said it aloud. And he had covered for her. The presentation. She returned to her desk, trembling. Checked the drive folder. Her original draft was there, edited, streamlined, elevated. He had revised her pitch, added slides, included analytics she hadn't had time to gather. And it had worked. A group email from the creative director praised Emma's team for closing the deal with the client. Damon hadn't taken credit. Not a word. She felt like the floor was shifting beneath her. For a long time, Emma stared out the window beside her desk, trying to remember all the tiny things she'd brushed off. How Damon once left a protein bar on her keyboard after a missed lunch. How he'd adjusted deadlines without explanation after she'd looked tired. How he'd never chastised her for taking longer breaks when her mom's condition worsened. He hadn't been cold. He'd been careful. He wasn't cruel. He was guarded. It struck her like a chord, the way people hide softness where it's safest, under armor, behind silence. Maybe she hadn't been the only one trying to survive. The next day, Emma stepped into his office without knocking. Damon looked up, startled. You're supposed to email before meetings. I know, she said, closing the door behind her. But I figured this was worth breaking the rules for. He said nothing, just waited. Emma walked forward, holding the envelope. I know it was you. The pharmacy payment. The edits. The pitch. His expression didn't change. The team handled the presentation. No, she said, voice low. You handled it. For me. You didn't have to. Still silence. Her throat tightened. Why would you do that? Damon leaned back in his chair. Because you needed help. And you weren't going to ask for it. His voice was calm, but his eyes, there was something in them. A weariness. A memory. A shadow she recognized. I lost my wife 5 years ago, he said suddenly. Lupus. She deteriorated fast. We were between providers. I maxed out 3 credit cards for her prescriptions. No one helped. No one even noticed. Emma felt her breath hitch. She used to say, Damon continued, that helping someone quietly was better than pretending loudly. He looked at her then, really looked. You reminded me of her. The way you carry too much without saying a word. Emma blinked away tears. Damon cleared his throat. I don't do this often. It's not part of the job description. I don't care, Emma whispered. It saved my mother. And it saved me. A long pause. Then, softly, he said, You're not alone, Emma. Something cracked open between them, not romance yet, not quite. But something tender. Human. Trusting. She smiled then, for the first time in weeks. Neither are you, she replied. He didn't smile back, but she thought maybe, just maybe, the corners of his mouth flickered. After that day, everything changed, yet, almost nothing did. Damon Ross still wore his tailored suits like armor. He still typed emails that sounded like formal dismissals of joy. He still walked the office halls with that same measured, deliberate pace. But to Emma, he was no longer a mystery. He was a man who had loved deeply. Who had lost. And who, despite every reason to retreat into the cold, still chose to help others, even if it meant doing so from the shadows. Emma returned to work with a quiet confidence she hadn't felt in months. She began to notice things she hadn't before. How Damon adjusted timelines for overworked staff, how he took on the most difficult clients without complaint, how he made space for people to rise, never demanding recognition. He was still strict, still precise. But behind his every, rewrite this, and, tighten the pitch, Emma heard something else now, belief. He pushed people not out of cruelty, but because he knew they were capable of more. And slowly, others started to see it too. When Melissa from finance took leave to care for her autistic son, Damon approved it without hesitation, and quietly arranged for a temporary assistant to help manage her backlog. When Jake in graphics came back from rehab, it was Damon who personally ensured he wasn't put on overwhelming accounts, though he said nothing publicly. Emma saw it all. And so, one Friday afternoon, she did something small. She left a cup of real, strong black coffee, his usual, on his desk. No note. No explanation. The next morning, a sticky note appeared on her screen. Good pitch. Try adding more emotion next time. D. And beneath it, another smaller one. Thanks for the coffee. The next week, Emma organized a casual gratitude board in the break room. Just sticky notes and pens, nothing fancy. At first, people ignored it. But then someone wrote, Thanks, Tina, for always bringing donuts. Another wrote, To the intern who fixed the printer, you're a legend. Emma, heart pounding, left one that read, To the boss who helped when no one else did, thank you. It was signed simply, E. She didn't expect a response. But she saw Damon pause at the board one morning, eyes scanning. He read her note and stood there a moment longer than usual. Later that day, he passed her desk and, almost as an afterthought, said, Nice work on the metrics report. Well written. It was the first direct compliment he'd ever given. And it felt like sunshine breaking through winter. At home, things improved too. Emma's mother responded well to the new treatment. Her appetite returned. Her cheeks filled out. For the first time in a long time, Teresa asked about Emma's life, about her job. He's still quiet? She asked with a smirk. Quieter than a shadow, Emma grinned. But I think he's listening now. As weeks turned into months, Emma grew bolder. She spoke up in meetings. She suggested campaign ideas with passion. And Damon, he listened. Even challenged her, sharpened her vision. One evening, long after most had left the office, Emma stayed behind to rework a proposal. She was staring at her screen, rubbing her temples, when she heard a soft knock. Damon stood there with 2 coffees. You've rewritten that same paragraph 5 times, he said dryly. Take a break. She chuckled. Watching me now. He sat across from her. Not watching. Just noticing. They sat in companionable silence, sipping coffee. And then he said, almost too casually, You've grown a lot. Emma's chest warmed. So have you. Their eyes met. There was something there, unspoken, but not unfamiliar. A shared understanding. 2 people who had carried too much, for too long, finally allowing someone else to help carry the weight. She smiled. You know, you could join us next Friday. We're doing a volunteer event at the shelter. Damon raised an eyebrow. I don't do group activities. You also didn't do smiling or compliments, she teased. Yet here we are. He considered that. Then, with the faintest trace of a grin, I'll think about it. It wasn't a yes. But it wasn't a no. And for Emma, that was enough. The once mean boss was still reserved, still formal, but he had changed. And so had she. They weren't healed completely. But they were healing, together. One small act of kindness had started it. And now, it was rippling outward, quietly, powerfully, beautifully. The night of the volunteer event arrived with the first crisp chill of fall. Emma had all but given up on him showing. The team from the office was already busy at the shelter, serving food, sorting supplies, helping families with paperwork. She had just tied her hair back and pulled on a donated hoodie when she heard someone clear their throat behind her. She turned. Damon stood near the doorway, holding a tray of canned goods and looking absurdly out of place in his black coat and collared shirt. For a second, Emma wasn't sure it was him. But then he spoke, eyes scanning the room. Where did these go? Emma blinked. You came. He glanced at her, almost sheepish. You did say I was changing. Figured I should live up to the hype. She laughed, too loud, too sudden, and tried to cover it with a cough. But Damon didn't flinch. He stepped beside her, waiting. And just like that, something unspoken shifted. They worked side by side for over an hour, passing supplies, helping sort coats for the kids, giving directions to the newly arrived families. Damon stayed mostly silent, but his eyes softened every time a child tugged on his sleeve or an elderly man thanked him. At one point, Emma found him crouched beside a little girl who had lost her mother in the chaos. Damon had handed her a stuffed bear from the donation pile and was softly asking her name. Emma watched from a distance, heart aching. This wasn't a man who didn't care. This was a man who had cared too much, and had once been broken by it. Later, as the evening wrapped and people began to head home, Emma found herself beside him again outside the shelter. The stars blinked above, the air sharp and quiet. Thank you, she said softly. For what? He asked. For coming. For helping. For all of it. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, I think I forgot what it felt like to do something that mattered, without hiding behind a desk. Emma smiled. You never stopped mattering, Damon. You just stopped letting yourself see it. He turned toward her, his gaze steady. You helped me remember. Her breath caught. There it was again, that current between them. Stronger now. Steadier. I wasn't always this guarded, he said. Losing her, my wife, it shut a part of me down. I told myself if I didn't get close to anyone, I wouldn't lose anything again. Emma nodded slowly. That's the same reason I buried myself in work. I was afraid if I slowed down, I'd feel how hard it was watching my mom fade. You build walls, thinking you're protecting yourself. But really, you're just alone. He looked at her then, really looked. It doesn't have to be that way. She felt warmth bloom in her chest. No, it doesn't. A breeze rustled between them, and for a second, neither of them moved. Then Damon did something Emma never expected. He reached out and gently took her hand. No grand gesture. No over-the-top declaration. Just warmth. Presence. Truth. And Emma, for the first time in years, let someone hold her without flinching. They stood there under the stars, hand in hand, two quiet souls who had survived grief, exhaustion, and the kind of loneliness that hardens people. But now, something different lived between them. Not just kindness. Not just gratitude. But love. Quiet, blooming, and real. Epilogue. 6 months later. The office buzzed as usual, but the energy had shifted. The gratitude board in the break room was now framed, filled to the edges with new sticky notes every week. Emma stood at the front of the conference room, pitching a bold new campaign. She spoke with fire, with clarity. Damon sat at the back, letting her shine. Afterward, as the team filed out, he lingered. Great job, he said, offering her a coffee. She took it with a grin. Only because someone once told me to add more emotion. He smirked. Must have been someone wise. Or just someone who finally learned how to care out loud. Their hands brushed. She didn't pull away. And neither did he. One small act of kindness. One guarded heart. One brave connection. In the end, the mean boss wasn't mean at all. He was a quiet helper, who just needed someone to see him, too. And together, they found healing and love.